George! What's wrong? The doorbell rang, and I was surprised to see my grandson George standing there. He looked like he had just come back from school, carrying his middle school backpack. George had visited us many times before, ringing the doorbell but always running away without saying anything. But that day, he stood still, not moving at all. I saw in his eyes that he wanted to say something. "Come over here and help me pick some vegetables." When I opened the gate, George quietly nodded and slowly walked in. For a while, as he helped me with the garden, George remained silent, and I waited for him to open up. After about 10 minutes, George's face twisted, and he began to cry big tears. "Why are you crying? Are you hurt somewhere?" I worried that George might have been injured and checked his arms and legs for any signs of harm. "No, that's not it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not being able to tell the truth until now." I waited for George to calm down, then gently encouraged him. "You've wanted to talk about something for a long time, right? Go ahead, tell me." "My name is Michelle, and I'm 65 years old. I used to work as a teller at a local bank. My husband, Stephen, is 2 years older than me and worked at the same bank. The bank is all about connections between people. Your smile has a magical power to soothe others, making you perfect for this job." When I first entered the workforce, Stephen guided me with a firm yet kind hand, teaching me the ropes of being a banker and a person. I was drawn to Stephen's genuine kindness and ability to connect with everyone he met. Stephen was highly respected at the bank and eventually rose to the position of branch manager. "Michelle, we've got a great crop of eggplants this year. The tomatoes are still small but looking glossy and cute." After retiring from the bank, we cultivated a small garden in our backyard, living a modest life while growing vegetables as a hobby. At the end of May, our only son, Nicholas, who had already started his own family, visited us with his wife, Cynthia, and our grandson, George. Nicholas had graduated from college, joined a company in the city, and 5 years later brought his fiancée, Cynthia, to visit us once. After that, we only received a letter announcing George's birth, and for 15 years, we had no contact. "What have you been doing, not showing up for Christmas or summer vacations? At least call sometimes." Stephen's voice, trained from his time as a branch manager, boomed through the small house entrance. "I'm sorry, Dad. Work has been so busy that I didn't have time to reach out." "Stephen, calm down. You're scaring Cynthia." I smiled wryly and tried to calm down Stephen, who was getting excited. Stephen's joy often turned into an overwhelming display, making it seem like he was angry to those who didn't know him. "It's been a long time, Cynthia. I'm glad to see you doing well. Sorry for not keeping in touch, Michelle." Nicholas's wife, Cynthia, looked a bit thinner than when we last met 15 years ago, but her bright smile remained the same. Beside her stood a teenage boy carrying Cynthia's bags, and I smiled warmly at him. "You must be George. Nice to meet you, I'm your granny." George, feeling shy, just bowed without saying a word. Despite that, I couldn't contain my happiness at meeting my grandson and kept talking. "I've only seen pictures of you as a baby, but now you look so much like Nicholas did when he was young. How old are you now?" "George is already 14. He'll be taller than me soon," Nicholas answered, standing next to George. That night, we shared a meal with our son's family for the first time in 15 years. Back then, George was still in Cynthia's womb. "I made too many dishes for George, so please help yourself to more," I said, but George only gave a faint smile and didn't say anything. Now that I think about it, Nicholas and Cynthia had been restless since they arrived, only exchanging brief greetings and not talking about their recent lives. Come on, Nicholas, you're back home, so relax like you used to when you were a kid. George won't feel comfortable if you don't. I joked, and Nicholas and Cynthia looked at each other, nodding in agreement. We were debating whether to ask for your help. Actually, Cynthia and I are currently unemployed. What? No jobs at all? Why? I was at a loss for words, exchanging glances with Stephen. We both worked at the same company, but we got tired of the toxic environment. So we decided to quit together and look for new jobs, but we haven't found any yet. We hate to ask, but could we come over for dinner a few nights a week? Cynthia is a great cook, and I can help with anything around the house. Nicholas and Cynthia pleaded, please, with strong urgency. Of course, seeing our son and grandson every day would be wonderful, but... Look up! Do you have any leads on new jobs? George is in middle school. You'll need money for school fees and college prep. Let's not go overboard, Stephen said, chuckling as he tried to calm my worries. They have their reasons. Stephen looked at our son and his family and said, like Michelle, I'm not overlooking your situation. But family helps each other in tough times. You can always come here for meals. He then smiled warmly and turned to me. Is that okay with you, Michelle? If Stephen says so. I couldn't say all my worries were gone, but I decided to follow Stephen's lead. With Stephen's permission, our son's family started coming over 2 or 3 times a week. Nicholas and Cynthia spent their days working part-time jobs and searching for new employment. Seeing Nicholas sighing while staring at his account balance made me want to reach out and help. Is everything okay? If it's too hard, don't push yourselves. You can live with us if you need to. Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep trying a bit longer. Nicholas's smile reassured me, and I chose to believe him. By mid-June. Do you have an early start tomorrow? The rain is getting heavier, so if you have time, stay over tonight. Stephen suggested, and Nicholas hesitated. We don't want to impose. Exchanging glances with Cynthia, he added. If it's not too much trouble. So, our son's family started staying overnight. Whenever George came over, he often kept his head down and remained silent. George, is something bothering you? Then Nicholas said, That's right, and stepped between George and me. George did poorly on a test recently and got scolded by his teacher. He's been really down about it ever since. I see. So, George, you inherited your struggle with studies from Nicholas. It's all his fault. Which means it's my fault. Stephen's joke made George nod slightly, but I couldn't help feeling that George was just trying to please Nicholas. Around this time, George began visiting our house almost daily, even when he wasn't staying over. He would ring the doorbell and then just stand there, watching us silently. But when I greeted him, George would run off to the bus stop in surprise. Seeing his school backpack, I figured it was on his way home from school. What's going on with George? Concerned about George's odd behavior, I talked to Stephen. Don't worry too much. At 14, it's not unusual for him to have a few problems he can't talk about. That's true, but... Even in the pouring rain, George took the bus every day to our house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a significant reason behind his actions. In early July, the days were oppressively hot and humid. Around midnight, I woke up to a noise. I heard what sounded like footsteps from the next room and held my breath. Did I lock up properly? I replayed my memory several times. Before bed, I always checked the locks first, and Stephen double-checked the same places. Even if I missed something, meticulous Stephen wouldn't have. I grabbed my smartphone from the nightstand and cautiously opened the bedroom door. Using the faint light from my phone, I illuminated the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Maybe it was my imagination? Stephen, who was sleeping beside me, also woke up. What's wrong? I thought I heard something, but it must have been nothing. I made sure everything was locked. Want to check again? We don't want to wake Nicholas and his family. Let's go back to bed. Neither Stephen nor I gave it much thought and returned to sleep. Some time later. Hurry up! George, you don't need to wash your face, just grab your stuff. The sound of hurried footsteps and our son and daughter-in-law's voices woke me up. It was pitch dark outside, not even a sliver of moonlight. Fully awake, I got out of bed and headed to the living room where Nicholas and Cynthia were. The clock showed it was just past 4 a.m. You're up early. What's the rush? My voice startled Nicholas, making him drop his duffel bag. The bag's contents were heavy, and it hit the floor with a dull thud. Mom, what are you doing up so early? That's what I should be asking you. What's with the bag? Nicholas hurriedly picked up the bag and hid it behind his back. It's nothing. It's just something important for work. That's right. It's nothing you should worry about. Cynthia added with a nervous laugh. Work. Wait, did you find a new job? Yes. I just got a call from, a friend from college. They want me to start immediately. Nicholas rambled, and Cynthia nodded along, saying, yeah, that's right. Congratulations! But is it so urgent? Can't you stay for breakfast? We have a meeting first thing in the morning, and it's far away, so breakfast isn't an option. Just then, Stephen woke up and joined us. This is sudden. Are you sure this job is trustworthy? Stephen's concern came through, a habit from his days as a branch manager. Dad, you've always worried too much. This is a company run by a college senior, and everyone there is kind. There's no problem. All right then. If you're confident. With Stephen's acceptance, Nicholas looked relieved. We have to go now. Nicholas and Cynthia hurried to the door. But George stood still, not moving. Come on! Let's go! Nicholas grabbed George's arm and pulled him outside. Does George have to go? It's almost summer vacation. He can stay with us. We appreciate it, Michelle, but we don't want to trouble you further. Cynthia said, taking the bag from Nicholas and heading to the car. Nicholas pulled George's arm harder, scolding him. Stop it! We watched helplessly as they drove away. At least Nicholas and Cynthia found work. We should support them quietly, Stephen said. Yes, but... Stephen's straightforward support contrasted with my lingering concern for George. 3 days later in the afternoon, I was harvesting vegetables in the garden. After an hour of work, I took a break in the living room with a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting a delivery, and was surprised to see George. George! What are you doing here? I tried to hide my excitement and surprise. Usually, George would run off when I greeted him, but today he stood still. Why don't you come in instead of standing there? I saw in his eyes that he wanted to talk. Come help me pick some vegetables. Would you like to? George hesitated, looking at me silently. Stephen's out with friends. It would help me if you could step in for him. When I opened the gate and gestured for him to come in, George nodded quietly and walked in slowly. For a while, George helped with the garden in silence, and I waited for him to open up. After about 10 minutes, I noticed a black snake near George's feet. The snake was ready to strike, and George hadn't noticed it yet. George, watch out! I immediately pushed George away. The snake lunged and bit my arm. George finally noticed the snake and let out a small gasp. Wow. But when he saw that I had been bitten, realizing I'd been bitten, he shouted, "Get away from my granny!" and chased the snake away with a stick. As he tried to chase it further, I stopped him. "Thank you, that's enough." The snake must have been scared of getting stepped on. I smiled, trying to ease George's fear. "But, Granny, you got bitten. That snake isn't venomous. I'll be fine." George seemed to collapse in relief, sitting down on the ground. "Why did you protect me?" George looked at me with a puzzled expression, and I asked him back. "Why would you ask that? You're my precious grandson, of course I would help you." Immediately after, George's face crumpled, and he began to shed big tears. "Why are you crying? Are you hurt somewhere?" I worried that George might be injured and checked his arms and legs for any signs of harm. "No, it's not that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not telling the truth until now." I waited for George to calm down, then gently encouraged him. "You've wanted to talk about something for a long time, right? Go ahead, tell me." "Dad and Mom told me not to say anything." With that, George slowly took off his shirt, revealing his back. There were numerous scrapes and bruises, and I was speechless at the sight. "These marks. Did Nicholas do this?" George nodded and began to tell me everything that had happened. After losing their jobs, my son and his wife became addicted to gambling and would take out their frustrations on George. George revealed that the real reason they came close to us was because of the safe Stephen had in his room. Stephen had converted some of his savings into gold bars and kept them in the safe for retirement. Nicholas and Cynthia had planned to steal the gold bars. I overheard their conversation. They threatened me, saying I knew what would happen if I told you. Threatened by Nicholas, George couldn't tell us the truth and had been suffering alone. The couple figured out the safe's combination, took the gold bars, converted them to cash the same day, and left George behind to go on a trip to Australia. "You did well to tell me. You're so brave." I hugged George tightly as he cried bitterly. An hour later, I told Stephen what had happened when he returned from his gathering. "I can't believe this." Stephen couldn't accept my story at first. He seemed to understand what I was saying, but his desire to believe in our son was stronger. "It's true. The gold bars are gone." Stephen quickly went to the room and checked the safe. "No! But that doesn't prove they did it. Someone from outside could have broken in. Remember, you said you heard strange noises that night." Even now, Stephen was trying to believe in Nicholas's innocence. "You made sure to lock up that night, didn't you? And what is it? Is there more?" I hesitated to show Stephen it until the end, but I finally decided to show him the video George had saved on his smartphone. "This is..." Stephen's face contorted with a mixture of sadness and anger. The video clearly showed Nicholas and Cynthia sneaking into the room, taking the gold bars from the safe, and putting them into a duffel bag. "I didn't want to show you this, but this is the reality." I held George close and appealed to Stephen's heart. George's back is covered in scars. He says Nicholas did this to him. George knew about their plan but was too scared to speak out. He must have been terrified all this time, especially today. But George found the courage to tell us the truth. Imagine how much bravery that took. We cannot ignore this child's courage. The one suffering the most here is not me or you, but George. Stephen looked down at George's face and slowly patted his head. "It must have been hard," You must have been in so much pain. I was wrong. Forgive me, George. Stephen shook his head to clear the sadness, then his expression turned to anger. A week later, Stephen and I went with George to the apartment where Nicholas and his family lived. Are Nicholas and Cynthia returning today? I asked for confirmation, and George answered clearly. Yes. The fridge is empty. What kind of life have they been living? According to George, they left only enough money for 10 days of food before going on their trip. Soon, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine parking, followed by footsteps on the stairs and Nicholas and Cynthia's laughter approaching. The front door slowly opened, and Nicholas and Cynthia, with their sunburned skin, walked in. Did you enjoy the trip? Stephen asked, and their laughter immediately stopped. Dad! Why are you here? Nicholas and Cynthia hadn't told us their current address. Nicholas glared at George hiding behind me and shouted, George! Did you tell them? You traitor! He lunged at George. Just as Nicholas was about to grab George, Stephen stepped in and twisted Nicholas's thin, frail arm. Ouch! I didn't do anything! Let me go! The self-defense techniques I learned for bank robbery prevention came in handy. When Stephen loosened his grip, Nicholas's emaciated body collapsed to the floor. How does it feel to go on a trip with money you stole from someone else? Stole? What are you talking about? Nicholas tried to bluff, but Stephen said, Why don't you just admit it? And showed the footage George had secretly recorded. So your goal was the gold bars from the beginning? George! You know what will happen to you later! Cynthia shouted, causing George to tremble. So that's how you've been hurting this child. But that ends today. You're going to confess everything you've done. Nicholas, intimidated by Stephen's glare, lost the will to argue and began to explain. Both Nicholas and Cynthia had a penchant for gambling. Initially, they used their allowance to relieve work stress. However, after experiencing a significant win, they couldn't stop, eventually falling into insurmountable debt. In the end, I abused my position in accounting and embezzled company funds, which led to our dismissal. We had no choice. No choice? The problem started when you got into debt from gambling. You should have been more responsible as parents before it got that far. Stephen's stern words left them hanging their heads. Dad, please. We'll change and work hard from now on, so please don't report us to the police. Nicholas apologized deeply, and seeing this, Cynthia hurriedly followed his lead. Stephen looked at me and then at George. George, what do you want to do? I don't want Dad and Mom to get arrested. I just want them to go back to being the kind people they used to be. Seeing George's sincerity, Stephen nodded with a smile. All right then. There's one condition. You two must undergo treatment with a specialist to overcome your gambling addiction. Understood? Got it. We'll do it. Cynthia nodded and thanked Stephen for his leniency. While our son and his wife focused on their treatment in a facility, George stayed with us. Although commuting by bus took more time, George never complained. I get to see different views, and I enjoy it more now. Perhaps George was slowly resolving his feelings toward his parents, as he seemed more appreciative of the little changes around him. Every day after school, George helped with the garden. Isn't weeding boring? I asked, and George smiled warmly. Not at all. Aren't you tired from bending over, Granny? He asked, concerned for me. During summer vacation, George collected suitable-sized wood from a nearby scrapyard. He skillfully crafted a small chair to make my gardening easier. Thank you, George. This makes my work much easier. I'm glad. I'll make you something even better next time. As school started, George became more energetic. During dinner, George enthusiastically shared stories about his day at school. Some people pay to experience farming. When I told my friends I help in Granny's garden, they were jealous. That's great. Next time, bring your friends over. I'll make some special vegetable curry. Awesome. But maybe without the bitter melon. Stephen laughed heartily. What's this? George's taste buds are still childish. I didn't say I hated it. I'll eat it. George pouted, defending himself against Stephen's teasing. They were more like friends than grandfather and grandson. George, who used to be very reserved, now openly talked with us. Thanks to him, our home was filled with laughter. Grandpa, thank you for always thinking of me, George said seriously, and Stephen shyly looked away. Michelle helped you. I didn't notice anything. George shook his head firmly. No, that's not true. You set the safe's code to my birthday, right? I overheard Dad talking about it. That's not worth thanking me for. You're our precious grandson. We didn't see you for a long time, but we didn't want to forget your birthday. That's why, thank you, Grandpa. George expressed his gratitude again. Every day, we received letters of apology and reflection from our son and his wife at the facility. While I cherished my time with George, I sometimes wished these moments could last forever. But George still needed his parents and would eventually return to them. Once Nicholas and Cynthia received proper treatment and overcame their addiction, maybe we could all go on a family trip. Hoping for the day they sincerely reflect on their actions, I savor these irreplaceable happy moments. I never thought my parents, who doted on my genius sister Luna, would say they didn't need me. Having one child is enough. We don't need you because you're a failure. Saying so, my parents kicked me out when I was still a child. The one who reached out to me in my confusion was my Uncle Liam. Sorry, it's not much, but let's live together. I grabbed his hand without hesitation. My name is Natalie. I'm now 30 years old, but I have a complex past. It's about my family. I'd like you to listen to this story first. I was born into a normal family with a dad who was a company employee and a mom who was a housewife. We lived with my grandma in my dad's parents' home, where my dad's brother Liam also lived. We started living there when I was 4 years old, and Liam was 24. It's not unusual to be single and living at your parents' home at that age. However, Liam had a reason he couldn't leave the parents' home. I didn't know much about it as a child, but it seems Liam was frail from childhood. He often fell ill even as an adult, which made it hard for him to keep a job. He worked part-time, but even then, he could only manage short hours, about 2 days a week. That income was obviously not enough for living on his own. Perhaps feeling guilty for being supported by his parents even as an adult, Liam always looked apologetic. You're just a burden to your parents. My dad would frequently yell at Liam, and I often witnessed it. And he always did it when my grandparents weren't around. My grandparents loved both my healthy dad and the frail Liam unconditionally. The cohabitation started due to reduced income during a recession, so my dad, being in their care, probably held back in front of Grandma. But when Grandma wasn't there, he would always say terrible things to Liam, looking down and mocking him. Liam, with a sad face, would just take it silently, neither getting angry nor talking back. Why don't you get angry? As a child, I once asked him outright. Liam, with a troubled look, replied, Because it's true that I'm being supported by our parents. As a child, I thought that made sense, but now as an adult, I think differently since my dad also lived in his parents' house, so he's not in a position to talk. If I had understood that at the time, I would have sided with Liam. As a child who didn't understand, I just felt bad when my dad yelled at Liam, but I couldn't say anything. The atmosphere was bad when the grandparents weren't around, but it was peaceful when they were. Liam would relax and smile in front of the grandparents, and my dad wouldn't show his true colors. My mom was too busy with me and my younger sister Luna, 2 years my junior, to care about the relationship between my dad and Liam. I thought our everyday life would continue like this forever. But then, everything suddenly changed. Both grandparents died in an accident. I was 6 years old at the time. Their death was incredibly sad and lonely, and I cried a lot. Luna and I cried together. I clearly remember Liam also quietly shedding tears. But what I remember most vividly, and can't forget, was my dad's laughter. Yes, my dad was laughing. Even when rushing to the hospital or during funeral preparations, he never cried once. It wasn't about being stoically composed. Even as a child, I could understand that my dad wasn't sad. And that turned into certainty. On the day of the funeral, my dad was laughing. He probably thought no one was watching, but I saw my dad's joyous expression. It wasn't a smile from sadness or confusion. As his daughter, I could tell. It was a smile of true delight. My dad was happy about the death of my grandparents. Probably thinking about the inheritance, that smile was so hideous, it scared me as a child and made me cry. He probably thought those were tears for the grandparents. Liam put his hand on my head and gently stroked it. Looking up, I saw his eyes, red from crying, but they were looking down at me with such kindness. What was this? Despite being brothers, Dad and Liam had completely opposite reactions to our parents' death. That moment greatly increased my sense of discomfort towards my dad. Then Dad's attitude changed drastically. First, his treatment of Liam became openly worse. "Why should I have to support a useless person like you? Be grateful I'm even letting you live here. If you can't pay rent, I'll take all the inheritance." At the time, I didn't understand, but it was an incredibly unreasonable thing to say. Despite having the right to an equal share of the inheritance, Dad wanted it all for himself because he had the highest income. Liam could have stood up for himself or sought legal action through the appropriate agencies. But he didn't. Even though he looked sad, he never argued back against Dad or claimed his share of the inheritance. Worried about Liam, who was losing his spirit, I asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm frail and can't work properly, so it can't be helped," Liam said with a weak smile. Every day, Dad hurled abuse at him, and the frail Liam became thinner and paler. Still, Liam would smile at me and say, "I'm okay." But 3 months after my grandparents died, Liam was eventually kicked out of the house. "Get out," Dad said, and Liam left without arguing or resisting. "Liam, I don't want you to go," I said, pulling on his arm in sadness over parting with gentle Liam, but he quietly moved my hand aside and patted my head. "It's okay. You're a strong girl, Natalie. You'll be okay without me." "But you won't be okay, will you?" Liam was frail and unable to work properly. How could he survive on his own? As I looked at him with tears in my eyes, Liam said, "I'll be okay," and left. Parting with Liam was sad, but as a child, there was nothing I could do. Moreover, I soon found myself in no position to worry about others. 2 years after my grandparents died, when I was 8 years old, I was attending elementary school like any other child. Luna turned 6 and was about to start elementary school. It all started when Mom said, "Luna is a genius, according to the preschool teacher. I guess she takes after me." A genius, maybe. Dad, getting carried away, decided on a whim to have her take an IQ test. The results were shocking. IQ 150? She's definitely got my genes. Luna's results showed an astounding IQ of 150. I didn't quite understand, but I knew Luna was somehow amazing. Luna, that's amazing. Thank you, Natalie. I praised Luna without fully understanding, and she smiled happily. Those were the good days. It was good until then. Then it became the worst. All right, let's apply for famous schools, Dad declared, acting on his sudden decision. Now? Even Mom was surprised, but she's a genius, so it'll be fine. Dad's mysterious confidence motivated Mom as well. From then on, Luna started attending cram school every day. Naturally, Mom was the one accompanying her, so house chores were neglected. That's when Dad said, "Hey, since Mom and Luna are busy, Natalie, you take care of the house." That's what he said to me. And so, I was tasked with laundry and cleaning. After school, I couldn't play with friends. I had to go straight home to do chores, or I'd be scolded by my parents. If I didn't do them properly, I was punished by being skipped meals. "We don't have time to care for an underachiever like you," I was told. "Why can't you score perfect marks?" Dad yelled at me after seeing my test scores in the 90s. "Try to learn a little from Luna," Mom said disdainfully. No matter how well I did on tests or even if I won first place at the sports festival, my parents wouldn't notice or praise me, they just ignored me. Like a machine, they only said to learn from Luna. And then, they even went as far as to say, "Well, it's impossible for you anyway. Luna is a genius, but you're incompetent." Luna truly was a genius and quickly got into a famous elementary school. As a result, my parents' treatment of me became even colder. They spent money on Luna, but I had to wear clothes that had become too small for me, struggling to make do. Luna got to eat delicious food. I was left with leftovers. Luna was taken on trips. I had to stay home. My parents blatantly favored Luna over me. "Luna will surely succeed in the future. Then our retirement life will be secure," Dad said, laughing. "Should she become a doctor? Or maybe a lawyer? Aiming for a politician would be nice too. We're super lucky to have a genius daughter." I was invisible in the eyes of my parents. My existence, crying in Luna's shadow, was forgotten. And when I was 10, my parents finally said, "We don't need you because Luna's education costs a lot of money." Huh? Confused by what he meant, Dad said, "I'm saying having just Luna is enough for us." "But how will I live by myself?" "We'll give you Liam's contact. Here's some money, now figure it out on your own." With just a small amount of money handed to me, I was truly kicked out of the house. I cried and wailed, banging on the door to be let back in, but there was no response. The door did not open. Desperate, I headed straight for the station. Being 10, I had some knowledge and could even ride the subway. Asking people for directions, I somehow made it to Liam's apartment. Liam came out to the sound of the doorbell, his kind face just as I remembered. He let me in with a surprised face, and when he heard my story, he was furious. "What are they thinking?" Even though I wasn't the one being scolded, I couldn't help but feel sorry and depressed. Wondering if I was just a burden here too and what I should do next, tears started to well up in my eyes. Then, a hand was placed on my head that looked down. It was a big, warm, and gentle hand, just like I remembered. "You've had it tough. But it's going to be okay now." "But what should I do now? I'm still frail, with little income and poor," Liam said, making a pained expression in front of me. However, His expression seemed much stronger than when we lived together before. Perhaps being away from Dad had changed something in his mindset. Liam looked at me straight and said with a smile, "Sorry, it's not much, but if you don't mind, I'd be happy to become your dad." Huh? I mean, I guess in this case, a stepfather? Though I might not be reliable. Before he finished speaking, I had already jumped into his big chest. Liam's chest, similar yet entirely different from Dad's, was very comforting. "It's going to be okay now," he said, gently stroking my back as I cried with relief. It felt like the true affection of a dad pouring onto me. Since then, I was raised by Liam. Indeed, Liam was poor and often sick, which made things tough at times. But even in poverty, our home had smiles. Having been with my parents, I had almost forgotten how to smile, but living with Liam, I started to smile a lot. Even though we were poor, it was a happy home, filled with lots of love from Liam. Wanting to repay Liam's kindness, I did my best in everything. When I worked hard, Liam would praise me. Even if the results weren't good, he praised the effort. Happy about being praised, I worked even harder. The existence of my parents, who never praised me, eventually faded from my memory. Growing up healthily under Liam's care, 20 years flew by, and I turned 30. And now, familiar faces stand before me. Dad, Mom. It's been a while, Natalie. Have you been living well? Dad, who I had pushed to the far reaches of my memory, said smiling. He had aged significantly, with barely any hair left. My gaze towards Dad was cold, which was natural. What do they want after all this time? Unfazed by my cold gaze, he said. Well, let's forget about the past and start getting along as a family from now on. Naturally, my response was, Huh? What are you talking about? Getting along as a family? Don't joke with me. Just as I thought, an underachiever like you has a bad mouth. No matter, I'll re-educate you from now on. No, thanks. Please leave. I pushed him away as he tried to enter the apartment. Then Mom joined in. Natalie, don't pretend to be strong. Rely on us. You must not be leading a decent life living in such an old apartment, are you? You have nothing to do with it. Just go home. Don't pretend to be strong. Just let us in. No, just go home. Let us into the house. Go home. What's with these two? If my memory serves me right, Dad and Mom are about 55 and losing their strength, yet they are unnecessarily forceful. Or maybe not, it would be strong if both of them came at me. As Dad's foot reached the entrance, I pushed back with all my might. The parents tumbled over from the force. I ended up looking down on them naturally. You're so annoying. What? I'm busy here. Can you please leave? What kind of way is that to talk? What do you take your parents for? The moment you abandoned me, I never considered you my parents. We raised you until you were 10. Until I was 10, yeah. I think I was only properly raised when my grandparents were still around. You still managed to live, didn't you? That doesn't give you any right to act all high and mighty. As my parents stood up, rubbing their backs, they looked utterly feeble. Despite being in their 50s, they looked aged enough to pass for their 60s, if not their 70s. You said it, didn't you? That Luna was enough for you. With a genius like Luna, there was no need for you to come see me. Things have changed. My words made Dad wince painfully. What happened to Luna? Did she stop working and hole up in her room? She became a lawyer. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Just as expected of someone with an IQ of 150. Then she disappeared. Wow. As the story unfolded, Luna apparently smoothly transitioned from college to graduate school and then took the bar exam. She didn't pass on the first try, but did eventually make it. I'm not entirely sure, but there were some training periods afterward, and she officially became a lawyer. But what do they mean she vanished? Luna said she wouldn't support us and left the house. So, you were abandoned? Congratulations. It's not congratulating at all. That ingrate. Has she forgotten everything we did for her? Well, there was no love, was there? My parents might have thought they were doting on Luna, but probably, for Luna, it was just suffocating. Parents who change completely based on just an IQ score. Parents imposing excessive expectations. Parents offering what they called love, which was nothing but their own desires. No wonder Luna got fed up. And the company I was working for went bankrupt. Tough economy, huh? There was no severance, and the unemployment benefits are about to run out. That's great. It's not great at all. And looking for a new job now is tough. Tough? I couldn't help but laugh at the lack of enthusiasm. So, look after us. The laughter stopped instantly. No. What? You're abandoning your parents? The only dad I have is Liam, who has been taking care of me since I was 10. What? Dad was stunned by my words. If you came to this apartment, you knew I was living with Liam, right? What are you surprised about now? You think of Liam as your dad? Liam, who has been frail yet worked hard to ensure I didn't suffer, is indeed my dad. I said, as my parents looked at me with surprised faces. Liam worked hard despite his frail health and did his best to make sure I didn't have to struggle. And I've worked very hard in return. So, you have a reasonable job? I guess. Suddenly, Dad grabbed my shoulders. Let go. I see. You're angry, aren't you? And embarrassed? Were you even listening? No need to hear it all to understand. You felt lonely, right? And you're sulking. That's it, isn't it? We always loved Luna more, so of course you'd sulk. But you're happy and embarrassed to see us. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't worry, we'll be with you as your parents from now on. I didn't understand what he meant. Was Dad already suffering from dementia? For a moment, I stared blankly at my parents' faces and then began to laugh at their expressions. Why are you laughing? Is it from happiness? Of course not. Just so you know, I haven't thought about you not even once in these last 10 years. Thanks to Liam, I've been leading a very fulfilling life. The sudden laughter took my parents by surprise, and I continued speaking. I graduated from college on a scholarship, you know. Is that so? Then you must have landed a job at a good company. Yes, I did. I got a job at a pretty famous corporation. Is that so? Is that so? And I met a nice person and got married. Then, I must greet your husband as well. No need. Huh? I will. It's impossible. He's abroad right now. Is that so? By the way, Liam is also abroad. Liam too? What do you mean? I thought if you were living here alone, that frail guy must have passed away. Don't just assume Liam has died. My husband is on an overseas assignment in a place good for recuperation, so Liam went with him. Liam has gotten much better and is happily playing with my children. You have children? It seems Dad's mind can't keep up with the flood of information coming in. I smiled at my surprised parents. At first, Liam was reluctant to live with us, but he finally accepted, and now we're all living happily together. Then, should we go abroad too? You can, but we won't live together or take care of you. Live on your own money. That's impossible, you know that. Are you abandoning your parents? You were the ones who abandoned me first. Angered by their utterly selfish reasoning, I finally lost my temper. My parents looked pale. I owe nothing to you who abandoned me, but I owe a lot to Liam. I intend to repay Liam from now on. Please, at least send us some money. Liam never touched the money I sent him and always lived in this old apartment. But finally, he agreed to live together abroad, so I came to make the arrangements. Huh? It's such a coincidence that you came on the last day I'm leaving this old apartment. What? You're leaving here? I've finished the moving out process, and all that's left is to return the keys. I'll be going back to my home abroad immediately. What about us? Are you abandoning us? Mom asked with a pale face, and I nodded emphatically. Thank you for abandoning me, I said with a smile, and the two of them were speechless. Really, thank you. Thanks to you, I am happy now, I said, passing by them. How does it feel for the parents who abandoned their daughter to be abandoned by their daughters? I asked one last question, but no reply came. I didn't wait for an answer and left the place, thinking this would probably be the real farewell with my parents. After that, I went back to my home abroad. I had worked hard while living with Liam. That hard work paid off, and I managed to get a job at a good company. Then I got an overseas assignment and married a man I met locally. Liam cried and celebrated. And now, with the birth of my children and living with Liam, I am living happily. With my husband, children, and Liam. Also, I hope I can find a wonderful man like your husband soon. Luna is beside me, laughing as she watches the children play in the garden. Now that you're finally free from our parents' curse, I'm sure you'll find someone nice. Before that, I need to get used to my job first. Why don't you try getting a lawyer's license here? I think I'll pass on being a lawyer. No more doing what my parents want. I'll work hard at the job I want to do. I see. Right after I left home, abandoned by my parents, a letter from Luna arrived for Liam. The letter spoke of her suffering under our parents' twisted love and pressure, leading Liam and I to secretly communicate with Luna, who was still living with our parents, without them noticing. Luna wanted to come to Liam too, but Liam's financial situation couldn't support both of us. Above all, our parents wouldn't allow it. So, for the time being, she lived with our parents who could support her, planning to leave home as soon as she became an adult. Luna endured a tough life, but she overcame the trials and gained her freedom. Luna left home, taking advantage of our parents' happiness about her becoming a lawyer. Of course, I helped her with that. She secured a job here, but is struggling with the language and unfamiliar things. But she'll be all right. After all, having lived with those parents, I don't know anyone as patient and hardworking as Luna. She'll get used to this place soon enough. It's Liam I'm more worried about. Liam says he's going to a language school, I said. Luna nodded with a smile. Right. It's never too late to start something new. Looks like his health is much better now, too. We have to make sure he enjoys life from here on. Exactly. Our parents who took Liam's inheritance and made everything theirs ended up squandering it all, and soon they were out of money. They managed to invest desperately in Luna's education but ended up unemployed. Trying to make money, they sold the house, but it seems they had taken out a renovation loan against it, leaving them with only little cash. They've been asking relatives for financial help, but everyone's been cold, forcing them into poverty. A relative informed me that apparently the couple fights nonstop. It's unthinkable to look down on family or discriminate, is it? Yeah. Luna nods at my words. I'll protect you no matter what. You've protected me enough. Thank you, Natalie. As I spilled tears at Luna's mature words. What are you protecting? A hand was placed on my head. It felt a bit smaller and more wrinkled than before, but still warm as ever. I turned around with a smile. Thank you. Huh? Seeing Liam's puzzled face as I turned around, I laughed and said, Thank you. Dad, I love you so much.